traditions and all our storytelling of the idea of India, the image of India and the perception of India. I say all this because in tourism, the perception of the country matters a great deal in getting tourists into the country. And I think it's very important because our oral history has got embedded in the fairs and festivals that we celebrate today. Science has, is riding pillion and all the kind of things that we today understand as ritual, but was a way of, popularizing science and traditions in the mass. So cultural diplomacy is basically India's soft power, and culture and tourism are conjoined at the hip, because tourism pillion rides on culture, because all the properties that you have, whether they are tangible monuments, museums, temples, architectural wonders that we have, or the intangible traditions that we have, are all cultural properties and assets. And tourism is able to actually market them, publicize them, promote them through events like these, and then ensure that India, as an aspirational country, because our Honorable Prime Minister, as the first incredible Indian, is the biggest brand ambassador for us today when it comes to tourism. His own one visit to a particular island can change the dynamics of how people want to go to that particular island. It can actually change the dynamics, has a geopolitical domino effect, ripples in the whole of the Indian Ocean. So that is the power of the cultural heritage that we have. And literature, because India is so diverse, its linguistic diversity is so great. And today, a couple of months back, Pali was introduced as one of the classical languages. And there's this whole, India's look and act, eats policy. It has such a huge resonance. That whole introduction of Pali as a classical literature, as a classical language, has such a huge resonance in the literary and the intellectual circuits in the east of India and in the ASEAN countries, that it is what you do with what you have, and I think that is cultural diplomacy for me. And literary tourism, of course, because if culture is all about conversations, then people read books, it's ideas. So, when you talk of globalization, Vasudeva Kutumbakam, in our earlier times, it is all about exchange of men, material, through trade, through conversations, ideas. And it is all because of this confluence of people interacting and ideating. And this is also a culture creative economy age, where you bounce off one idea and you create another idea. And this is the age that we live in today. So, literary tourism, conversations, reading, getting inspired, converting those literary conversations from books into movies, what is called jet setting. I think this is all part of this whole idea of how you can promote your country and how you can interest, because different people who travel have different interests. Some people come to explore places. For example, Bundi. Rudyard Kipling wrote a book in Bundi, and people want to actually, when you actually promote the Bundi fort, you talk of the author who was associated, who sat there. When you talk of the Bundi circuit house, for example, you actually end up talking of how Tagore actually spent, Satyajit Ray actually spent a couple of nights there and wrote a very interesting story. So this is how, when you talk of Dehradun, for example, you talk of Ruskin Bond and the train to Dehradun. So these are iconic, how you associate cities, how cities get their character from people who are authors, people who actually resonate with the city, write about the city.
You're right, how well a country is able to leverage its cultural aspects, its books, its literature, its music, its soft power really, determines largely how well it is placed on the global stage. And if we were to look at cultural diplomacy and how it has evolved over the years globally, of course the term may be relatively new, but cultural diplomacy per se has existed since the times of the Silk Road, and it's been informally sort of undertaken by travelers, traders, philosophers alike. However, globally, if you see, how do you see cultural diplomacy as something that's evolved over the years globally? Besides examples such as K-pop music and Korean drama and the French language outreach through Alliance Francaise and the British Council's cultural outreach. Besides this, how has it evolved?
So, when you look at India, rather when the world looks at India, they not only see India as a destination, which is of course there because we have the largest number of cultural and natural heritage that we have, or other offerings I would say. We have the largest number of UNESCO World Heritage Sites. We have an equal number of geological sites. We have an equal number of Ramsar sites today, which are on the bucket list of people who want to travel to India. And you cannot travel to India just one time. So it's a matter of repeat travel. So, if you look at what has happened in the ancient past, how do we understand our own ancient past? Fahim visited India, Hun Sen visited India, somebody talked about the Fourth Buddhist Council in Kashmir, that's how. So it's authors, cartographers who came to India, drew maps of the India today, so we understand the geographical limit of how this Bharat today that we know of at one time was an Akhand Bharat. How do we do all those conversations? We do all those conversations because of travelers. So travelers converted into authors. Today you have travelers who are influencers, you have travelers who are content creators, today you have travelers who are vloggers and bloggers who come into the country. One quote by a traveler who comes to India or goes to some other country can actually change the whole dynamic. So it's basically tourism. If you look at Central Asia today, how are Indians traveling so much to Baku and Azerbaijan today? It's because the government of Azerbaijan and all those Central Asian countries have invited Indians to come there, become their brand ambassadors and send them back, and they are today coming back to India and talking about how great the country is. So who are these people? So travelers are actually the brand ambassadors of any country. So, it works both ways. So if as hosts, we can actually be more welcoming, be more responsible tourists, and be more sustainable in our practices, then everybody who comes here will carry a good word about India that will ensure that many more people come to India. So today, as Swati mentioned, that we have the K-pop. So South Korea has actually invested. Today they are heavily invested. They have this culture called the Hallyu tradition, and they have invested effort, time in actually getting their K-pop, now the K-cosmetics. There's also this new culture which is happening, which I like the women to read, which is called the P4 movement in Korea, which women are doing against a whole lot of misogyny which is happening. So, people get actually impressed by what is happening. And today, when you talk of globalization is not just about borderless travel. It is also the kinds of ideas that are traveling in the world. There is this free movement of ideas, and today is the time when India, with all that it has to offer, can actually raise up to the profile that has been created. Today we talk about becoming a $5 trillion economy and a $25 trillion economy in the Amrit Kal by 2047. If we can economically be so aspirational, then intellectually also we can be so aspirational. And all the young people who are sitting in the crowd actually need to get invested in first reading, learning, understanding their country, doing many more dialogues, and also dialogue like the one that me and Swati are doing here today is also the basis of our tradition. It's Vad, Vivad, Anuvad, Samvad. These are all traditions. And there's a brilliant book written by a BHU professor called Vad, based on our own ancient traditions, which you must read. In fact, it is the basis of the historical materialism that happened in the West. It is based on our own Indian traditions. So Vada, dialogue, is the basis of cultural diplomacy and of literary tourism.
Right. Interesting. So literary tourism has multiple aspects to it. One, of course, is festivals such as this one that we are participating in. I'm also reminded of Festival of Libraries, which you conducted. So great libraries can be used to promote literary tourism. Iconic bookstores can be one. But the other aspect of literary tourism, which has been explored very well by the West, but not so much in India so far, is turning houses of authors into museums and inviting people to experience the places where these authors wrote some of their favorite books in, and creating trails around those. Now I'm reminded of this story that came in early this year from Maharashtra itself, where a thief broke into an author's house, Narayan Surve's house, and once he realized that it was an author's house and he had stolen valuables from an author's house, He returned those valuables with a note of apology. What does that tell us? What does that tell us? That tells us that this is soft power of literature. So, what are we doing on that front? Is there a plan to, convert some of the houses of celebrated authors into museums and invite people there?
That's a fantastic question, Swati, because Russia is one country which has actually developed a lot of literary museums. And last year, while we did the Festival of Libraries, prior to that, we also did something called the International Museum Expo, where we invited the Russians to do a session on literary museums. So literary museums are basically, talking about the authors, and Russia has had a lot of authors, and I remember growing up on a lot of Russian literature, because at that point in time, the Russian literature, there was Russian buses would come